that old adage about reproducing like bunnies? Bunnies seem to have endless babies. They are born, they get old enough to reproduce, and if you give them the chance, they keep reproducing until death comes for them. Swift and unavoidable, unless death comes for them too soon. Sorry, Glorificus. But, well, that's sort of the idea. You see, rabbits, bunnies, whatever you want to call them, they don't exactly have the greatest chances of surviving to adulthood, and they mature quickly and have lots of babies to make up for that. Because there's always something lurking out there that is trying to eat them. Many offspring in an environment with so many dangers ensures that at least some of them will survive to reproduce themselves. You see, we're not built that way. Evolutionarily speaking, our path to reproduction is a much longer one. Not only that, humans tend to only produce one offspring per birth. Multiples occur, but at a much lower rate. So what's the difference? Aren't we both mammals? Shouldn't we be fairly similar? Well, it turns out that our reproductive cycles have a lot less to do with our close evolutionary history and a lot more to do with the environments to which we're adapted. I'm Miss Den, and today we're exploring the ultimate balancing act in nature, how species decide when to grow, when to reproduce, and how much to invest in their offspring. Well, they don't decide. Natural selection does. According to the Oxford Dictionary, the life history of an organism is its pattern of survival and reproduction, along with the traits that directly affect survival and the timing or amount of reproduction. You see, this theory attempts to explain the diversity of life history patterns and the mechanisms by which natural selection has shaped life history traits. It addresses questions such as why organisms are large or small, why they grow fast or slowly, why they mature early or late, and why they produce one or many offspring. These traits contribute directly to age-specific survival and reproductive functions. Compared to purely morphological, behavioral, or physiological traits, life history traits have an especially strong effect on overall fitness. They can also vary widely between closely related species or even among populations of the same species. Ecology and evolution both rely upon the fundamental idea that there are limited resources in a given ecosystem, and that there are some organisms in that ecosystem that are better competitors. Under most models, the better competitors get the resources, and those limited resources could be anything from mates to food to sunlight or water. Resources are often enumerated as if they could be definitively classified. In reality, if it is something that is required by all or any living things, and it exists in the ecosystem as a limited quantity, it is a resource. And if it is a resource, there will be competition, and competition is rife with winners and losers. Not to quote Cersei Lannister, but in the game of survival, you win or you die. Not that the reward of surviving is immortality, more so it is that the survivor's genes carry on in the population through progeny. It's important to note that life history is not and cannot be the same for all species. Not that competition plays out within and between species, and it's that between species where we find the merits of varied life histories. There are so many forces acting on living organisms and shaping populations, but natural selection is the best known and easiest to illustrate. You see, life history isn't just a term in a textbook. It's not just when organisms mature and how they reproduce. It's one of the core principles of evolution. But maybe we aren't there yet, and that's okay. We can look to some examples, some case studies to better understand this concept. Some species will experience multiple reproductive events, such as guppies. They will spawn frequently, producing many eggs each time. This model of reproductive lifespan is known as heteroparity. Meanwhile, salmon will only spawn once over the course of their lifetime. Immediately after they will die, that is called simiparity. The difference here is that the life cycle of the organism can either complete after a single reproduction, or the organism can have the capacity for multiple reproductions before the life cycle ends. You could compare this to annual plants and perennials, respectively. If I want sunflowers or poppies in my garden, I have to replant them every year. Meanwhile, if I want roses or hydrangea, They can plant them once and they will continue to grow back for at least the next couple of years. Perhaps we could also look at another example I like to call quantity versus quality time. Sea turtles are well known for their reproductive strategy of laying many eggs, burying them in the sand, and essentially hoping for the best. They leave their eggs to hatch and then fend for themselves in a highly hazardous environment. There's no guarantee of food, plenty of predators, and even us to worry about. I suppose the plus side is the notoriously long life ahead for the surviving offspring. On the other hand, you have something like an elephant. They tend to have only one calf at a time, gestate for over a year, nurse for 2, and stay in close proximity with their young for up to 16 years. That's a lot of time and energy devoted to a single progeny. Each of these reproductive strategies has its merits, but they have drawbacks as well, also known as trade-offs. Let's take a look at these in a more measurable way. Let's compare the stat sheets for an elephant and a mouse. Yes, we are changing up the example here, but I want us to see two organisms that are extreme in most ways. Now, side by side, let's see how they stack up against each other. The base attributes here can tell us a great deal about the life history of a species, but there's so much more to it than how and when these organisms reproduce. Life history class can be determined by the base attributes. I developed a little character game sheet for us to look at all of the other comparisons here. And we can see that the mouse falls into the R selected class and the elephant falls under K selected. We can explore what that means a little more later in the video. While the frequency with which both species reproduce is varied, they are also capable of multiple reproductions in their lifetime. As far as the environmental adaptations listed, we can see some pretty stark differences. Mice can be found basically anywhere and everywhere, from the walls of your city apartment to, well, Narnia. They can gain the traits of unstable environment and dispersal specialist, but there are costs associated with these benefits. Increased growth rate means a decreased lifespan. Giving up some parental care gains points for reproductive output. Our elephant, on the other hand, has high predation resistance and a stable environment adaptation. But there are trade-offs here too. Lifespan is going to cost reproductive output points, and growth rate is sacrificed for parental care. Now we can switch out the species or even make up our own and play this game all day, literally. I made a game of it. But there's so much more to get to. It's fairly easy to recognize these pressures in familiar species. Most of us know that a spider that produces 300 offspring at a time can't possibly care for every single one of them, and that the red sequoia tree, known as General Sherman, didn't reach that size over 5, 10, or even 50 years. So what is the merit of these traits? Essentially, one way or another, they aid in survival. Survival boils down to producing offspring, and those offspring producing offspring, and so on. To talk about this, we have to talk about trade-offs again. So first, let's look at age at maturity for reproduction. Reproductive maturity at an early age is clearly advantageous to organisms that often find themselves to be food for other organisms. Remember our mice from before? Yeah, you'd be hard-pressed to find a mouse in the wild that wasn't constantly running and hiding from something that sees them as another easy meal. Birds, snakes, foxes, cats, my dogs, every vertebrate lab ever. Point being, they aren't long for this world, and well, why waste time getting big and strong when you're bound to live fast and die young? On the other hand, a delayed maturity ensures, most of the time, greater parental care. There is time for offspring to learn from their parents, form bonds, and sometimes these bonds even extend into a pack or a herd, and in the case of humans, maybe even a village. Yes, we belong to this category. After all, if we use the capacity for pregnancy as reproductive age, then we aren't mature until the ages of 12 to 16. After all, we're fairly large with a relatively long lifespan and gestational period. We have time and we have energy to ensure our young have all the resources they need to reach adulthood. Next, number and size of offspring. Remember our friends R and K selected species? Well, you're finally getting a picture or a drawing. looking at a graph of population growth for R-selected and K-selected species. Let's refer back to these species characteristics for a second. R-selected species, they see fast maturation, minimal care, and a short lifespan. K-selected species, we're going to see slow maturation, few large offspring, extended care, and longer lifespan. Based on these descriptions, which curve do you suppose is the R species? If you said this line, you'd be correct, the pink line here. So what I see is exponential growth followed by steep fluctuations around the carrying capacity. For our other line, that would be our K-selected species. Here, you're going to see much more of a logarithmic growth up to the carrying capacity, and then much smaller fluctuations above and below that carrying capacity, because it's never going to stay just there. But it does essentially reach a plateau. If I put a line that shows the slope generally, I would get this plateau here for the K-selected species. So we could talk about equations, but this is evolution. It's a lot more intuitive than that. R-selected species, with their ability to reproduce so rapidly, are excellent colonizers. No, not that type of colonizer. These species are some of the first that you will see in succession scenarios. They tend to be small and abundant, but extremely prone to periods of feast and famine. Meanwhile, the growth curve for K-selected species is slower. They tend to be larger and require a great deal of stability in the ecosystem to sustain their long lives. On the curve here, there's a considerable amount of vulnerability in the K species as it moves through this unstable environment. See what I'm saying about trade-offs? Finally, let's talk about parental investment. Not talking about trust funds, college funds, or even the Parent Plus loans that some of your parents may have taken out for your undergrad degree. Parental investment that I'm talking about is energy, time, and resources sacrificed by the parent to ensure survival of individual offspring. Talked a lot about animals, but this extends to plants too. It takes a lot less from a fern to produce spores than it takes for an apple tree to bear fruit. At the same time, those ferns don't have to divert energy to the growth and development of their progeny. But an apple tree takes years to mature before it is able to invest enough energy into the production of large, fleshy fruit. Now that we've got the basics down, let's look a little deeper. And by a little deeper, I mean it's time to center ourselves, the Homo sapiens. No hubris in naming ourselves wise man, huh? The thing is, when we talk about ourselves, we have to reach across the academic aisle to anthropology. Human evolution is incredibly complex, but only for the last 3 million years or so. Instead of asking a million different questions, let's just ask one. Why do we have grandmothers? So, what is the grandmother hypothesis? Alloparents are not unique to humans. They are simply an individual that is not a biological parent that cares for one or many young of the species. Chances are we've all had alloparents of some kind: aunts, uncles, cousins, older siblings, the mom from the mnemonic device about the planets who just served you pizza or nachos depending on when you were born, and most interestingly, grandmothers. Or in the case of my 101-year-old Meemaw, great-grandmothers. The presence of grandmothers in our evolutionary history asks the burning question of why do women of our species stick around and play such a pivotal role in our society after reproductive age? In the context of life history, we don't have a lot to justify such a prolonged life or community involvement from females. While we're the only species to employ our parents as child care providers, we aren't the only ones that rely on the community to care for the young. Several other species with alloparents and community involvement in the rearing of young include orcas, elephants, and several canid species. The grandmother hypothesis has a long way to go, and who knows, maybe those anthropologists will figure it out one day. We've heard a lot of information today, So let's use that to examine some common claims concerning life history theory and figure out what's supported and what's disinformation. 1. Evolution always favors more offspring. This is dismissed. Recall our graph of R versus K selected species? There are some pretty clear-cut points on this graph that indicate more offspring provides a distinct advantage, but there are also many other factors to consider. In humans, single births are most common, followed by twins, but with twins, the risk of complications increases dramatically. Triplets, the risk to mother and children skyrocket. Species, ecosystem, parental investment all interact on a sliding scale. To say one extreme version of a trait is always favorable discounts the effects of trade-offs. This is dismissed. 2. Longer-lived species are more evolutionarily successful. Now, consider the age of reproductive maturity for longer-lived species. 15 years, 12 years, 7 years, or according to this article published in the journal Science, 150 years for the Greenland shark. Now consider rats, rabbits, grasshoppers, minnows, or salamanders. Would such frequent prey organisms really benefit from long lives given the energy allocation it requires? This is dismissed. 3. We can optimize for everything all at once. Did you see my Dungeons and Dragons inspired character sheet? Haven't you ever played Skyrim, Fallout, any other RPG? If you're a jack of all trades, you're a master of none. Trade-offs are unavoidable. Dismissed. 4. All organisms are either R-selected species or K-selected species. This is my favorite misconception on this topic. Take a look at your dog, if you have one. How would you classify them? Your first instinct may be to say, okay, after all, they have a high investment in their offspring, they have fairly small litters and moderate lifespans, let's say 10 to 15 years. But when we compare them to a lot of other large mammals, such as primates, dogs tend to have larger litters and much faster maturation timeline. We might do better to call them generalists, and they would be in good company. Raccoons, foxes, crows, coyotes all exhibit traits that either fall in an intermediate range or that spread their adaptations across the spectrum and just sort of end up somewhere between R and K. We're just about at the end of our time, but before we part ways, let's get a quick recap. First, life history is all about how evolution comes to determine when species grow, when to reproduce, and how much to invest in their offspring. 2. Resources are limited, and this leads to all kinds of competition. Life history plays a role in how this competition plays out over lifetimes. 3. Life history includes age of reproductive maturity, number and size of offspring, reproductive lifespan, and parental investment. 4. Our species excel in unstable ecosystems, while K have the upper hand in well-established, stable environments, and these classes of species exist on a spectrum. And 5. Species can't be optimized for every single scenario. There is always a trade-off. If you're interested in real-life applications of life history theory and how it is currently employed in scientific research, look into invasive species. For more information about R selected species and for K selected species, conservation might be your jam. I've included citations and reading recommendations if you're interested in learning even more. But that's all I've got for you today. Who knows? Maybe this was my last video like this. Maybe it's my first. But remember, life finds a way, usually through carefully balanced trade-offs.